Hello, everybody, and welcome to our humble abode, which is St. Clement's, Ewell. Yeah, if you want to take a cheat sheet, I've got one there. If you pass the cheat sheet round, then this is the third session on St. Mark's Gospel. Okay, now, one of the peculiarities of St. Mark's Gospel, and all four of the Gospels are different. Anybody can see that, particularly with St. John's Gospel being something of an outlier, but also Matthew, Mark, and Luke are profoundly different. Mark is one of the reasons why Mark is very different, is because Mark is largely a collection of miracle stories. At least the first half of St. Mark's Gospel is a collection of miracle stories. After that, the last third is the apocalypse and then the suffering and death of our Lord on the cross. Now, there are lots and lots and lots of miracles in St. Mark's Gospel. What we're going to do is just look at the first three and a bit miracles, which is chapter 1, 21 to 45. It's there on the sheet for you. Now, and we're going to try and work out why there are so many miracles in St. Mark's Gospel and what is the point of all these miracles? What are they trying to tell us? And why did St. Mark include so many miracles in his Gospel at the expense of other things? So there's very little teaching in St. Mark's Gospel. There's very little of Jesus sitting down and talking in St. Mark's Gospel. It's much more about Jesus doing stuff, in this case, miracles. Now, if we start off at verse 21, then they came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and he taught. But he doesn't say what it was that he taught them. So that is left as a blank, which is odd. Why doesn't it say what his sermon, what his teaching was? Presumably the readers of the Mark Gospel didn't need to know because they already knew. They had already been informed what the teaching of Jesus was. I don't know. But then it says, and the people were astonished at his teaching. So it's not the content of the teaching, but it's the teaching itself. They're astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. So his teaching was far more convincing than the scribes because it carried much more weight with it. Fine. In their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him. With a loud cry, came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. Now, that's the first miracle, which is the banishing of an unclean spirit. Now, these unclean spirits, there seem to be rather a lot of them in the time of our Lord. And nowadays, of course, they are not so common. We can say that without fear of contradiction. You've all seen, if you haven't seen it, you need to see it, the greatest Catholic film ever made. I don't mean The Sound of Music. I mean The Exorcist. The Sound of Music's quite good. Song of Bernadette's good, but The Exorcist is real evangelical crack cocaine, I find. Probably made more converts for the church than the other. It's a one. Who's seen it? Have you all seen it? Yeah, you've seen it. I've seen it several. No, I've seen it several times. It's wonderful. What, you don't think it's wonderful? Oh, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Do you think it's wonderful?
Jesuits.
Yes, about Jesuits in the days when Jesuits actually did things like fight the devil. It's set in Georgetown, and of course, still in Georgetown are the Exorcist steps, the house overlooks the staircase and so on. And of course, the plot is lifted from St. Mark's Gospel. The plot is let us go into the pigs, and then the pigs jump off the cliff. You see, it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Have you seen it? No. Oh, only me. Yeah, it's simply wonderful. It's wonderful, 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 and it's a great film. Anyway, the point is, Jesus was an exorcist. Is what this putting this miracle first is telling us Jesus was an exorcist. Who were all these spirits that were wandering through the earth for the ruin of souls in the time of Jesus? Well, it's mysterious. We don't really know. Were more people possessed by devils in those days than nowadays? Almost certainly. Nowadays, there are people who are possessed by devils, but they are vanishingly few. They're very, very, very few. The William P. Blatty's book, The Exorcist, is supposed to be based on a real case. But these cases are very, very, very rare. They say there's more diabolical possession in Africa and so on, where people believe in spirits more. But it's very rare. So why is it here, this thing, right at the beginning of St. Mark's Gospel? Well, I think it's here simply to tell us that Jesus is Lord and even the spirits obey him. He commands, and the unclean spirits, he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. In other words, Jesus is a person of absolute authority, and the unclean spirits flee before him. So that's what it's saying. Now, one of the things is, in those days, the pagans of the Roman Empire, we call them pagans, they weren't really pagans. They were pagans. They are what we call nowadays animists. That is to say, if you were a pious Roman, as opposed to a sophisticated Roman, dwelling, let's say, in the countryside, like the poet Virgil was, you might well believe that there was a spirit in the stream. You might well believe there was a spirit in the woods. You might believe each plant and each tree had a spirit. And you might believe, so you would believe there would be wood nymphs and there would be dryads and so on and so forth. And you would believe, for example, the river Tiber had in it Old Father Tiber, who was a god, and so on. What this is saying is that the spirits are now being thrown out of the people they possess and also from nature. God has come to displace these spirits. In other words, the era of animism is over. Now, there's a famous poem by Milton called On the Morning of Christ's Nativity, one of his earliest poems. And when Christ is born, it has it says that all the spirits that inhabited the world left the world. They lost their power. In the face of the true God, they all melted away. This idea of the spirits, in other words, the sort of minor gods, these spirits, have been replaced by the one true God. Now, we do not believe in spirits. We really don't believe in spirits. Some people do on this planet. There are animists around. The most famous animists of all, of course, were the Native Americans. But in Africa, you have animism still. That there are spirits, and you go to a place, you get a funny feeling about the place. That means the spirit of the place is not happy with you, so you need to make a sacrifice to placate the spirit of the place. The nature is inanimate, literally without spirit. And therefore, nature is not threatening to us. We don't need to placate the spirits. The spirits have been defeated. Even when the spirits take possession of a human being, the spirits are now defeated. They can be driven out. Go forth, Satan, be away with you. Now, so this is telling us that the world has been subdued by Christ, and Christ is the Son of God, and he is almighty. That is what this is telling us. It's a demonstration of the power of God. It's also something else. It is a Jesus in real time, as we'd say, enacting the restoration of humanity. Many human beings feel oppressed by bad spirits. Nowadays, you might go to a doctor saying, I'm feeling depressed, and the doctor will say, here, take these pills, or tell you to go and see a counsellor. In the old days, and perhaps also in Africa even today, you say, I'm feeling depressed. And people say, you are oppressed, not depressed, oppressed by a bad spirit. And there's something that is sort of, and you often get people, even in England, who say that they are suffering from depression and it's caused by a bad spirit of some sort. Or when I go into that bedroom over there, I get a bad feeling. And so when I'm lying in bed at night, I feel this pressure on my chest and so on and so forth. All psychosomatic, the spirit is just a projection of their depression or their anxiety or something like that. Jesus has come to deliver us from the things that are oppressing us, deliver us and set us free from all the burdens that we have created for ourselves. Now, I don't want to go down the path of putting a completely psychological explanation on this man's spirit that is possessing him, but maybe it was the spirit that he is being delivered from is his own bad humor, shall we say, bad sense of self, and so on and so forth. But maybe it is actually, a minor devil has taken possession of him. I don't think we should be too worried about minor devils taking possession of us. Not going to happen unless we specifically invite them in. So his fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. His fame spread as the man who can banish spirits, the man who can command spirits, i.e., the man who is God, and the man who restores human beings to the way they should be. Now, do we really believe, the gospel is asking us, by the gospel I mean the book of St. Mark is asking us, do we really believe that Jesus Christ has subdued the world? Or do we believe the world is a hostile and strange place and it's out to get us? And here we are sitting hopefully at home, but a volcano might go off, or an earthquake might happen, a tsunami might sweep us away, a terrible wind might sweep through and flatten our crops, etc. Do we feel that we are at the mercy of natural forces, or do we feel that these natural forces do the will of God, that we are belonging to God and we are essentially projected? When we look up and see the stars and the moon and the sky and so on, do we feel that we are tiny creatures at the mercy of alien and uncaring forces? The answer to both questions, clearly, is no, because we have been loved by God and therefore we are protected by God. So I think, can you imagine the impact that would make on a Roman reading that? Instead of being somebody who feels cast onto the world, naked and defenseless, he now realizes that he is protected by God and God has conquered the world. Have no fear, I have overcome the world. The other thing is, even modern people often feel, contemporary people, often feel that they are oppressed by forces over which they have no control. An awful lot of people who are normally quite intelligent nevertheless believe in conspiracy theories. Do any of you believe in conspiracy theories? Well, it's not a conspiracy. Today, so what? Where's your voting station? It's over the tent. Conspiracy theories are more like, it doesn't matter. Yeah, no, it's more like, whatever we do, it makes no difference because they are in control. So, for example, you might get a degree in astrophysics, but they fake the moon landings and basically it's all a sham and so on and so forth. Knowledge isn't really knowledge, progress isn't really progress, and so on and so on. And but the biggest conspiracy theory of all is freedom is not really freedom. Freedom is an illusion. It's all in the hands of powerful people who are covering their tracks and not allowing us to flourish as we would like to. And we're not responsible for our inactions. Those sort of conspiracy theories. And that essentially, that is what an ancient Roman would have believed. We're not free. And of course, a lot of people nowadays also believe that we are not free. Any of you believe that? Good. In Italy, it's very, very common for people to believe in conspiracy theories. In Africa, it is pretty common for people to believe in conspiracy theories. I just mentioned those two countries, that continent, that country, because those places where I've lived and I've dealt with it. But it's really quite astonishing. In England, it's much less common, thanks be to God. Okay, now let's go on to the next miracle. So there we have the miracle of the more cosmic miracle. Jesus has come to redeem the world, to save the world from the spirits. Second one, on leaving the synagogue, he entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. Why would our blessed Lord bother with one old woman? Why? What's the point? Oh, leave her alone. She's got fever. She'll get over it in a few days, or maybe not. She'll die, but she's probably old. Why bother? Yes. Uh, you could look at it like that. So it's purely sort of, how could I put it like? It's purely sort of, what do you call it, transactional. But no, it's not. The point of the matter is the poor woman is in a poor state, and immediately he goes to her aid, to her succor. He helps her up. He helped her up. He grasped her hand and he helped her up. He approached, he grasped her hand, and he helped her up. In other words, she was lying prostrate. He approached, grasped her hand, helped her up. So he didn't sort of ignore her. No, he approached. God has approached us. That's point number one, surely. So you're lying there with fever. God has forgotten all about you and doesn't care. Wrong. God approaches. He grasps you by the hand. The strength is in his grasp, and he helps you up. He helps you up. You get up with his help. And then the fever leaves her, and she, in gratitude, waits on them, in gratitude, which is presumably what she did anyway, but she does it in gratitude. Now, it's interesting, she is the mother-in-law, and she's not a domestic servant. St. Peter probably did not have in his house a domestic servant, but she is what Americans call a homemaker, and what we used to call a housewife. What's the politically correct term for housewife these days?
Stay-at-home
mother. Yeah, okay, stay-at-home mother-in-law. But in those days, no women went out to work. I mean, a few might have gone out to be midwives and things like that, but no women went out to work, as fishermen or as factory workers and so on. So, in other words, what she does is what she always does, but she adds the intentionality of thanksgiving to God. Now, what it's saying is your work, dreary, dull, always the same, as it might well be, can nevertheless be transformed as an act of thanksgiving to God, who has saved you in your illness. I mean, even when you're not ill and been saved in your illness, you can still do the same thing. Now, the first miracle was cosmic, the position of Jesus Christ in the world and the healing of the world, the restoration of humanity, the restoration of creation to what it was at the beginning. This one is deeply personal. And yet at the same, he helps her up. He puts her back on her feet. You're not meant to be prostrate in bed, which is, they believed, and we believe to some extent, that illness is a result of sin. We say of original sin. So Jesus restores her to what she should be, what she was at the beginning. So, and of course, isn't it nice that I suppose the man with the unclean spirit is the first person to benefit from Jesus' healing. And then now we have this old lady. She probably wasn't that old. She was probably in her 50s. But in those days, being in your 50s is probably quite old by the standards of the day. Then, when it was evening, after sunset, because obviously they've heard about the mother-in-law, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed. They'd also heard about the man in the synagogue. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases and drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. So Jesus then does a mass healing and a mass exorcism. Not a mass like lots of once, but one after the other. So Jesus is the healer and the exorcist.
Well, I read this before. I assumed that in those times they meant by demons, they meant like mental health issues.
Could be.
And that's why they sort of put together, isn't it? Illness and demons.
Could be. It could be they had mental health issues, as we now call it. I mean, a lot of people who've got mental health issues do sort of scream and shout and things like that. So it could well be that. Epilepsy is another explanation, or maybe Tourette's syndrome or something like that, or just yeah, I mean, you do get that, don't you? So it could be. But the point of the matter is the restoration of humanity to what it was in the beginning. Adam and Eve in the garden never got ill because they were in perfect communion with God. If we were in perfect communion with God, we'd never be ill. Our illness, our imperfections come from the fact that we are alienated from God because we're not in complete communion with God. So Jesus, by being God, is there to restore complete communion between man and God. At the touch of Jesus, there's nothing between him and the person on the receiving end. Therefore, the person on the receiving end is cured of all their illnesses. Now, this is obviously something that happened, I believe, that people were cured. But it's also a demonstration of what the mission of the Saviour is about, to restore humanity to its, I was going to say primitive state or pristine state, or its state of union with God, which it had before the fall. Okay.
So may I ask, what
yes.
by he drove out many demons,
yeah.
not to have been permitting them to speak because he knew them.
Because they knew him. They knew him. Yes, and he also says that refers to the first miracle where it says, I know who you are, says the demon, the Holy One of God. Jesus does not want the demons to reveal he is the Messiah or the Holy One of God, presumably because later on we find out some Mark Scotland, they wanted to take him and make him king. Because if it comes out that he's the Messiah immediately, the people are in no state to understand what his messiahship is about. They will assume he is the king who is going to lead them in their wars against the Romans. And remember, after the resurrection in the Gospel of St. Luke, yes, I know it's St. Luke, the two disciples on the road to Emmaus say, we thought he was going to be the one to set Israel free. In other words, the terrorist leader, or whatever you call it, who would set, like the guy who came after Jesus, Bar Kokhba, who led the revolt, which was almost successful against the Romans, and which ended at the tragedy at Masada, and with the complete destruction of Jerusalem. In other words, he would be a rebel leader. Jesus's messiahship is spiritual, not material. It seems obvious to me that Jesus did not come to overthrow the Roman Empire. Did he? I mean, he didn't come to overthrow the Roman Empire.
Well, I suppose if you were a Jew of the time,
well, they were desperate to overthrow
the son of David.
That would have got them going.
Fought against all the Philistines.
Yeah.
And so I suppose we see it to this day. Wouldn't like you think that? We don't think it would be spiritual, we see it as material.
Yeah. We're very materialist. In those days, probably about 40 to 50% of the Jewish population of Syria, Palestine, was agitating for the overthrow of the Roman Empire. I mean, there were these people called the Sicarii who went around with big knives stabbing people in crowded places. And there were those people called the Zealots. And there were the other people who moved out into the desert, the Essenes, and lived a sort of monastic life deliberately outside Roman life. And then, of course, there was the big revolt after the time of Jesus, which ended with the complete destruction of the Jewish nation. And they were all sent into exile, and the temple was destroyed, and Jerusalem was leveled, and this, that, and the other. But and also don't forget, the largest Jewish community was not in Palestine; it was in Egypt, in Alexandria, and there were constant riots between Greeks and Jews, and so on and so forth. So a lot of them were very, very, very short-tempered and violent people. Now, Jesus was not a pacifist. Well, he was actually, because he says, if somebody strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. Sounds pretty pacifist, Jesus, but it would be simplistic to say Jesus was a pacifist. But Jesus was certainly not a political leader. He was a spiritual leader. And that, of course, is something that some people find rather hard to take. Then it says, rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed, sat in silence, spoke to God the Father. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, which is quite a word, isn't it? The stalkers. And on finding him, said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Can't you leave me alone even for a bit?" No, he didn't say that. He said, "Let us go on to the nearby villages, that I may preach there also. For this purpose I have come." So he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. So more demons are driven out. So do you see demons? It's quite.
Yeah, sorry. It was written in Greek, wasn't
Yeah.
it? And then they've used here spirits and demons. So
Yes.
in the translation, would they have been the same word?
I don't know. Demon is daimon in Greek. One of the things is that there's no difference really between the two. We think of a demon as obviously a devil, but a daimon in Greek just meant a spiritual being. So an angel is also a daimon. So they're not necessarily. Sometimes there's evil spirits, which makes it clear that they're evil spirits, but they're clearly demons are evil spirits. And then we have another person. A leper came to him and kneeling down begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him and said to him, "I will do it. Be made clean." Notice the hand of Jesus touches the hand of Simon Peter's mother-in-law. He grasps her by the hand. This leper, he touches him with his hand. The leprosy left him immediately, just as so he's immediately cured at the touch, as was Simon Peter's mother, and he was made clean. Now the trouble with this is, when Simon Peter's mother had her fever, was it an infectious fever? Should she, he not have touched her because she might have caught something nasty off her? I don't know. I'm not sure. Is fever infectious? Not necessarily. It depends whether you've got some underlying morbidity. Anyway, but Jesus obviously went into the sick woman, not frightened that he was going to catch something horrible off her. Now he touches the leper, not frightened that he's going to catch something horrible off the leper. Now, as we know, at that time, lepers were forbidden to approach healthy people. They lived in out-of-the-way places in leper colonies, and they were literally outcasts from society. They were not allowed to approach. They'd go around with a bell and clappers and something like that to warn people that they were lepers and to keep people away. And people would quite literally shun lepers. Now, our blessed Lord is not shunning the leper, but rather touching the leper. The other thing is the leper has come up to Jesus. A leper came to him. And the leper is breaking the rules by going near Jesus, a healthy person. The leper should stand at sort of, 500 feet or something. But then he comes up to him within touching distance. Now, obviously, the leper feels that if he comes up to Jesus, he will not be shooed away. He will not be rejected. He also feels that somehow or another, Jesus is not going to enforce this rule about lepers having to keep their distance. And Jesus goes even further. Not only does he allow the leper to approach, he touches the leper. The leper says, "You can make me clean." The leper believes in Jesus' power. He doesn't just believe in Jesus' power. He believes that Jesus is also a person who does things differently from everybody else. I think that's a rather important point, that the power play that there is between lepers and non-lepers is abandoned. It doesn't apply here. Now, one of the things is when you approach anybody, particularly in the time of the Roman Empire, you would have to get your story right, and you would have to address them in the proper way, and you'd have to approach them in the proper way. You would have to bow and scrape or whatever it is you had to do. Because everybody had their rank in society. Everybody, there were rules about who could talk to whom. I don't know if any of you have ever been in the presence of royalty. Oh, good. And you were told beforehand you cannot speak to them; they must speak to you, and you are not allowed to ask them questions. Were you told that? You've forgotten.
No, I haven't forgotten. She's just been. No, she went to a garden party.
Yeah, and you weren't allowed to say, "How are you?" You only see them at a distance. But it's very, very, very boring with royalty because you can't have a proper conversation.
Are we at this point meant to say to you, have you been?
Many times. Many times. I have to say that when I met a member of the royal family in this country, it turned me into a Republican. Because I thought, is this it? Is this really the summit of social climbing? God, is it worth it? No, I said to myself. It was very, very, very boring. And she was the most boring. What? No, it wasn't Princess Anne. Princess Anne's probably all right. She was the most boring woman I've ever met because clearly nobody had ever contradicted her. No, it wasn't Margaret Dunlop. But there again, I mean, I've met foreign royalty and they've all been very nice. Yeah.
What did you do as you were told?
Well, it was very, very interesting because I was in the room and there was a person nearby and I said, "Oh, Your Eminence, come and talk to Her Royal Highness." And immediately he looked like a rabbit caught in headlights and fled. And it was Cormac. Yeah, and he left me with Her Royal Highness. Well, he's probably paying for it now, eh? Whoops, this is going out on the internet. Stop that at once. Okay, it's really, really boring dealing with people who stand on ceremony. It really is boring. One of the most boring things about in Italy is I remember being given a very severe telling off by my brother because I said ciao to a person who was a very important person, who was also sort of relation of mine by marriage. And in Italy, you're not allowed to say ciao to anybody unless they are your social equal. You have to say buongiorno, buonasera, etc. Did you know that?
Sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I had obviously created a scandal by saying ciao to this person who was a general in the Italian army. And I thought, well, it doesn't change the fact they lost the war. Anyway, I was really cheesed off by that. But the idea that you have to talk up to people and so, for God's sake, we're all equal, okay? Yeah, I mean, it really is ridiculous, isn't it? It really is ridiculous. What?
Back to the leper.
Yeah, let's go back. But the leper treats Jesus as an equal. There are no barriers, no social barriers between them, even though there was a very important medical barrier between them. The reason why the lepers were not allowed to approach people, why they were outcasts, is because they were very, very infectious. And they didn't have any cure for leprosy, and I don't think they still do. We can slow it down and so on. And therefore, the idea of a leper coming up to you.
I don't think it was that infectious.
Oh, I think it's, well, I don't know.
Sometimes these priests that used to go to the leper colonies, they'd survive for years.
Yeah, then they'd get it like Father David and so on and so forth. In Trinidad, there was a leper colony on one of the islands, and the island is still there. The leper colony is not there.
Off the coast of Crete.
Oh, is that also a leper?
Colony
Yeah.
in the 1960s.
Gosh, I think the one in Trinidad was a leper colony until 1960. But and of course, Molokai, where Saint Damien of the lepers went, was literally a dumping ground for unwanted human beings who just happened to have leprosy. It was in Hawaii, so it was all really horrible. But there is no social barrier between you and the Son of God. Even if you're a leper. If you're not a leper, there's no social barrier between you and the Son of God, a fortiori. Even more so.
Mildly infectious.
Okay.
About 95% of people have natural immunity and cannot get it.
Well, if any people had known that at the time of our Blessed Lord, they wouldn't have bothered, would they? But sadly, they did not have the internet and phones and Google. Yeah, well, that's really nice to know. So we're not going to catch it. But it is, I mean, in those days, they did know it was infectious. The only thing they could do was exile people from the human family. Nobody is exiled from the human family with our blessed Lord. The accessibility of God is what this is telling us about. It's a miracle, but it's the accessibility of God. Now, please remember, and you do remember, in Roman religion, the gods were far away. They were on top of Mount Olympus, and they weren't thinking about you. They were far away physically. They were far away mentally. They would not be thinking about you. Why should they bother to consider you? And therefore, you were terribly far away from the gods. You didn't even go into their temple. You offered the sacrifice, or you witnessed the sacrifice outside the temple. So that, I think, is what it's saying, is that in this new religion, and don't forget, St. Mark's Gospel was written to promote a new religion, God is close, and God, if you approach God, he will let you approach him, which is quite astonishing.
Also, I think it says as well is that obviously during that time, he would have been, the leper would have been ritualistically unclean.
Yeah.
So by him touching Christ,
yes,
it would have made Christ unclean.
Yes, but in fact, it's the opposite way.
It swung it around.
Yes, the leper is cured. If we approach Christ, we will experience his cleansing of our souls. Even though we may or may not have leprosy. Let's say we don't have leprosy, but we all have, if you like, a sort of a leprosy of the soul which needs cleansing. So one of the things is all the guilt, all the things that you'd much rather not think about, all the things that depress you or frighten you, all the things that weigh you down, these will be lifted by the touch of Christ. Then it says, then warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. Then he said to him, see that you tell no one anything, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them. Now, he sends him to the priest, so he gets a certificate saying he's recovered from leprosy, he can rejoin society. The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter, couldn't keep quiet. He spread the report abroad so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places. People kept on coming to him from everywhere. Notice that this is the second example of it. We have it spread, a third example. We've got 3 bits. His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. Okay, it spread. Then he clears some other law. Then the whole town gathered at the door. It spread. And then he went off. Everyone is looking for you. It spread. And he went to their synagogues, etc., throughout the whole of Galilee. And then a leper, and then it spread abroad. It spread again. So we got an emphasis on spreading in Galilee. And if you're a Roman reading this book of St. Mark, and you think, Galilee, where's that? It's some tiny little place. Galilee is about the size of Surrey, Sussex, Surrey. West Sussex, probably. It's quite small, isn't it? Some of us have been to Galilee, haven't we? And it's really quite small. Well, I mean, driving across Galilee is from one side to the other is an hour each way. And then the guy reading the book says, well, that Galilee, that's really uninteresting. It's such a tiny place. But then he says, hang on a sec, here am I sitting in Pompeii. Ooh, what's that distant rumble? Here am I sitting in Pompeii. And it spread to me as well. So it started in Galilee, but it was not restricted to Galilee. It started in the middle of nowhere, but now it spread everywhere. And it was contagious. And what is the message? Well, this is interesting. It's not Jesus' teaching, it's Jesus' presence. And I think what the person who wrote about St. Mark, what he wants is, he doesn't want to say to you, here is a book about the teaching of Jesus. I want you to understand the teaching of Jesus, then you could get to know Jesus. Rather, he says, here's a book about Jesus, which enables you to get in contact with Jesus. You don't you make direct contact with Jesus rather than learn about Jesus and then meet Jesus. You don't approach Jesus through his teaching. It's more, as St. Cardinal Newman said, St. John Henry Newman said, cor ad cor loquitur, heart speaks to heart. You are touched by Jesus, you reach out to Jesus, and you are saved. And the teaching bit comes later. And presumably, once you've read St. Mark's Gospel, then you say, well, have you got any other books on this? Oh, yeah, try this. It's a bit heavy going, though. It's St. Paul's letter to the Romans. Or try this. This is, St. Paul's letter to the Colossians. It's really quite simple. Or try this. This is St. John's Gospel, which is a book about teaching, although it's also a book about miracles, interestingly enough. But it's also about teaching. Although the teaching in St. John's Gospel is quite hard to follow, isn't it? I would say. Now, so I think, yes, points to consider down at the bottom. What do these miracles tell us about the humanity of Jesus? One of the things it says, he felt sorry for him. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand. He didn't recoil, he stretched out his hand. So Jesus is the one who goes into her. He approached. Jesus is the one who approaches humanity. And Jesus is the one who feels sorry for people who are suffering. So our Blessed Lord's number one, and it says very little about what Jesus is feeling, but that bit is important, moved with pity. Jesus is the one, the compassionate one, seems to me. That is his character. It doesn't, and the rest of his character does not appear, doesn't it? Oh, really great guy, and this, that, and the other, and great sense of humour, non-smoker. It didn't say anything like that, or great conversationalist, and says, no, just the compassionate. Now, the reason everything else is left out is simply because it wants to emphasize that one characteristic, which is compassion. And those Christians who have gone down the route of being compassionate have followed Jesus very closely. And I think particularly at this point of Mother Teresa. She actually was living in her convent, which was in a very nice part of Calcutta, and because Calcutta was a very important place, and she left the convent, she went into the slums of Calcutta, and she lived in the slums. She didn't wait for them to turn up at her doorstep. She went to them, and she ministered to them with compassion, and no other way, only compassion. None of this, let's build a hospital or any of that nonsense. No, purely compassion. That is rather, again, St. Francis left Assisi, left everything, went to people, and didn't have anything to give them except a compassionate heart. He didn't have any money. He was a beggar. Other people also who sort of left and went to people, like Don Bosco, who actually lived in, I think, in a small town, but went to the slums of Turin and befriended feral children, of which there were rather a lot in those days. There were horrible little children who nobody else wanted, who were running around, trying to live as best they could on the streets of Turin. Yes, I believe so. But I think they've all got homes. Have you not got homes to go to, as we often say? I think they've got homes to go to. But believe it or not, in Turin, in the first sort of flush of the Industrial Revolution, they had feral children that nobody cared about. Don't forget, in a place like Naples, half the population didn't have a home, lived on the street, which was quite a nice place to live in, beautiful weather and this, that, and the other. But those sort of people who lived in squalor and poverty, he went to them. And so Jesus Christ is the one who goes out to us in compassion. I think so. And why? So these miracles, I think, are teaching miracles in that they tell us what Jesus is, who Jesus is, and what Jesus is about. The restoration of humanity to its prelapsarian state. Prelapsarian means the state before the fall. Okay, have we got any comments or questions or objections? Yeah, objection, Your Honour.
I don't know if you mentioned it in the first part. Who was the target audience for this gospel?
Yeah, I mentioned it the first part, I've forgotten. Yeah.
Because Matthew was for the Jewish community.
Allegedly, yeah.
So Luke's was the Greeks.
Allegedly, yeah.
So who was?
Well, the book, any old book, the target audience is anybody who's curious enough to pick up the book.
Right.
And you never say to somebody, I'm terribly sorry to put that down at once, it's chick-lit, it's not for you. And you never say to a woman, oh no, sorry, you the chick-lit is at the other end. This is Dickens, away you go. You never say that. It's, you can read whatever you like. Yes, yes. We don't believe in sort of, if you want to read a Barbara Carden, that's fine. But if you want to read a Sidney Sheldon, that's fine, or a Wilbur Smith, that's fine. So Mark's Gospel is aimed at the inquirer. And I say it's aimed at the inquirer because of its shortness. It's a small book. It's an introduction to Christianity, but it's much more than just an introduction to Christianity. It's to the inquirer who is curious and who is seeking the presence of God, and who will find the presence of God through the medium of the book. That's all. I mean, it's not aimed at Greeks, it's not aimed at Jews, it's not aimed at anybody. I would say that its audience would have been, for better or for worse, overwhelmingly from all classes of society, but probably predominantly female.
Right, you said that, yeah.
I don't know why I have that feeling, but I just have that feeling. And because the early Christians were predominantly female, although we don't really have the evidence to back that up. It's just a funny feeling that most people have. I'm not sure if it's true.
Where does that funny feeling come from, though? Because
the funny feeling comes from the fact that, believe it or not, you might find this rather strange. It comes from the fact that, or from the prominence of females in the gospel story.
Yeah.
Interesting, they're not so prominent in the church today.
Yeah, well, no, they are. I mean, so for example, if there were no females, if it were a normal sort of book, which it's not, there would be no females at all. But there are quite a lot of females, and these females clearly were important. Now, it's a bit like it doesn't spell out why the females are important. You have to work it out. Now, there's a very famous bit in the story of St. Francis, written by, who wrote the story of St. Francis? That guy. Not Ubedin of Casale. Not, anyway, this Jacopone da Tordino, not him. Same guy who wrote the Dies Irae. He wrote the first life, and then they said, this is no good, go back and revise it. And then he wrote the second life of St. Francis. What was he called? Anyway, in the second life of St. Francis, or the first life, St. Francis's corpse is taken into Assisi, and St. Clare appears at her window, and they show the corpse to St. Clare looking out of the window, and then they take St. Francis away and bury him. Now, this is interesting because St. Clare's never been mentioned in the story beforehand. No, this is the first life of Francis. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he was. No, the first life. It's written by a guy who was almost a contemporary of St. Francis, but he wasn't. He wrote the Dies Irae. Who wrote the Dies Irae? Okay. Now, the point is, he gives us the game away. Why did they go and show the corpse of St. Francis to St. Clare if they'd never met? Well, clearly they had met, and clearly they'd had quite a profound friendship. But that friendship was excised from the official version of St. Francis' life. So it's a bit like finding a house with a blocked up window. It's a blocked up window, so there's no window there, but there was once. So in other words, it leaves a trace. Now, the mention of Mary Magdalene in the Bible, in St. Mark and in all the Gospels, is clearly an indication, even though it says very little about her, she was a very prominent person in the early church, seems to me.
Thomas of Celano.
Thomas of Celano, that is correct. He wrote the first life of St. Francis, the second life of St. Francis. Yeah, Thomas, and he also wrote the Dies Irae. Yeah, or was that Jacopo? No, Thomas of Celano. Yes, a friend of mine used to live in Via Tommaso di Celano in Rome. Okay, now, so
can I just
yes.
Just to go back to what you were talking about before with demons and that formulates the question really, I suppose. But in terms of demons and spirits, you sort of said they're not around now, we don't experience that. But how could that be explained in presenting in other ways by some of the behaviour of some prominent picture people, Hitler plus to the present day and beyond, as it were? Would you say that is there some possession of evil spirits?
I would certainly say that Hitler was evil, but I wouldn't want to let him off the hook by saying that he was possessed by a demon, therefore he was not responsible for his actions. So poor chap,
Because there's such evil even to this day being done, isn't there? So are we saying that's pure human?
Yeah, there is evil in the world, but it is people cooperate with it. Whereas, of course, in the Bible, the demons victimize the people they inhabit, and then the person is liberated from the demon. And if you went along and sort of said, Hitler, I've come to liberate you from your demons, he'd say, but I don't want to be liberated.
How do you know they're not people who've been...
Because he chose to be evil.
How did you know?
Well, I think at the end of his life, it was pretty obvious.
Hitler, but I was thinking generally, there's people, even people, serial killers. How do you know? I mean, obviously I've worked with people who are very psychotic, etc.
Yeah.
So you can see that's very clear because then they come out of it. But how do you know people's whole lives aren't consumed by some evil spirit?
You don't.
Because they suddenly seem to disappear, but perhaps they haven't disappeared. They're in another form.
Yes, it's quite possible they're in another form, and that they are the spirit of temptation, rather than the spirit that seizes you by force. But the spirit of temptation. People nowadays, I don't think they are very good at resisting temptation. In fact, they just give in to it at once. They don't even call it temptation anymore. They call it opportunity.
Quote Oscar Wilde.
Yes, we all know the Oscar Wilde quotes. I won't even mention it. But the idea of opportunity, so you see a £5 note lying on the floor and you're tempted to steal it, so you do. But that sort of temptation, that's an opportunity. You go home to your mother and say, you never guess what I found on the paper. And I found a £5 note. Wasn't that wonderful? She said, oh, God, that's great. Let's go for a drink. Or whatever, I mean... Yeah. No, but the idea of temptation that's sort of to be resisted is not so good. But the discourse of possession is something that we don't really understand and grasp and experience today.
It's just strange, isn't it? That it was very
well, it is strange. I agree. Yeah, we do. Well, yes, we do. Well, where is it? Where is it? Where are the demons and so on and so forth? Presumably, with the coming, one possible explanation is with the coming of our blessed Lord, they've all gone back to hell and will stay there.
Through baptism.
Yeah, well, yes, we have an exorcism at baptism, but I wouldn't go down the path of saying all pre-baptized babies are,
No.
Oh, yeah, have you seen some of them?
Yeah. That God has banished them, and they can't. Was it possibly also the fact that there were lots of diabolical possessions in Palestine at the time of our Lord as a providential way of demonstrating to us about what the reign of Christ entails, namely the defeat of diabolical possession? Don't know. Because actually it's very interesting. There's a lot of diabolical possession in St. Mark's Gospel and the Gospels, but not so much in the prophet Isaiah and the book of the Kings and so on, and the law of Moses. You never hear about people say if somebody is possessed by the devil and the Lord of Moses. Listen, I don't think so. Whereas you do hear about somebody having sort of bleedings and this, that, and the other.
But there wasn't. But isn't that go back to sort of like the Old Testament, sort of when the nation of Israel came out of Egypt,
and Israel came forth from Egypt,
and they went against the nations.
Yes,
and like the worship of Moloch was child sacrifice. So
yeah, but
wasn't that a form of demonic worship?
Yeah, Moloch was a demon, and Baal was a demon, and Astarte was a demon. According to Christians, that there are two ways of describing pagan gods. Either they are personifications of natural forces, so Venus is love and this, that, and the other, or else they are demons. You can take it or leave it. Which explanation is best? I think the explanation I would give is that they are personifications of natural forces. So the god of fire is Vulcan, so on and so forth, rather than it's worshipping a demon who you associate with fire. But they weren't possessed by Moloch and Baal, were they?
No.
You do get these people who became frenzied votarists of Moloch and Baal, as, for example, very clear on Mount Carmel, the priests of Baal gash themselves with knives and get themselves up into a frenzy, but they're not possessed.
There was that sort of interaction, wasn't there, with the ark and then the god that would fall over.
Oh, Dagon.
Oh, yeah, Dagon, yes, because he was a demon, and therefore he paid, homage, despite himself, to the ark. Very strange, isn't it? It is very strange. Right, we better stop there because we've had 56 undiluted minutes of joy. And we can stop. Okay? Okay, good night, everyone.